Close your eyes and imagine. Imagine yourself, jobless, frightened, penniless. Your entire family relying on you to find any type of income. And you're not alone. Millions of others struggle along with you, wondering where all the prosperity of the past years have gone. This event is not of some fictional writing or screenplay, but of actual events between the years 1929 and 1941, a time known as the Great Depression. The entire world suffered as stocks plummeted, banks failed, and companies laid off workers by the millions. To subdue the fear of economic uncertainty, President Franklin Roosevelt introduced the New Deal, his plan for economic relief, recovery, and reform that would forever change the United States.
Economic recessions seem to occur with an almost eerie pattern throughout American history. 1839, 1857, 1873, and 1893 all mark the beginning of a major economic recession. Another recession was about to occur in 1914, but was delayed because of United States involvement in World War I. After the war, many found prosperity in a time known as the Roaring Twenties.
During the 1920s, the U.S. economy grew very strongly, and it wasn't just an ephemeral growth or anything. It was robust economic growth caused by big improvements in technology. And so when economists look at this, they kind of point to a couple of things that were really helping the economy grow. The first was the electrification, and then the other was the dissemination of the internal combustion engine, which went into cars but also went into trucks, it went into tractors, and so boosted productivity throughout the economy.
Farmers, however, were hurting during the 1920s.
During World War I, because of the war, a lot of other farming regions were out of commission, and so the price of all sorts of agricultural crops went way high. And farmers want to plant as much as they could. That led them into trouble later in the 1920s because during that period they borrowed a lot of money so they could buy more land, they borrowed money so they could buy tractors, those kinds of things. But then during the 1920s, agriculture in the rest of the world picked up, and so prices for agricultural products went way back down, and lots of these farmers were kind of left out on a limb. They borrowed a lot of money. It was very hard for them to pay all that money back now that the commodity prices were so low.
Looking for reform, Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected in the 1932 presidential election, promising a New Deal to the American people.
I pledge myself to a New Deal for the American people.
After the 1929 stock market crash and massive flood of bank failures, Americans were left in fear.
We lived with my mother's grandma and grandpa to help them out, and also it helped us out. And they raised vegetables, they had animals, and cows, horses. So they raised everything we ate.
Their savings were lost. Their land had devalued, and all the prosperity of the 1920s had dissipated.
Roosevelt's first priority was to end the stream of bank failures that had stripped many Americans of their life savings by imposing the Emergency Banking Act.
He said, okay, all the banks in the United States are shut down. We're having this bank holiday. And those banks can't reopen until we're sure that they're sound.
Later, in May 1933, Congress enacted the Truth and Securities Act, which required investment firms to give accurate stock information to investors. The Securities and Exchange Commission allowed the government to regulate the stock market, and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation insured money invested in banks to further ease bank tensions. After securing the financial market, Roosevelt moved on to revive the farming economy with the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, AAA, in 1933.
Essentially, what they did is they were trying to reduce the supply of agricultural commodities. That was good for the farmers who received the payments to not grow, but it was bad for consumers because the prices that they had to pay for these things were now going back up. When it comes to the Agricultural Adjustment Act and those agricultural policies, that the multiplier was negative. For every dollar that the government spent, the economy shrank.
Because of these problems, the AAA was deemed unconstitutional in 1939. However, the federal government had already demonstrated its ability to influence major sectors of the national economy.
Back towards the cities, Congress enacted the National Industrial Recovery Act, which created the National Recovery Administration, or NRA.
The idea was they were competing too much, and that cutthroat competition was really bad for the economy. So let's cut them back and not have them compete so much. And that should be good for the economy. But what that allowed them to do was negotiate with themselves a way for them to cut back their production and increase prices. If the prices are higher, people aren't going to buy as much. So it's not good for consumers, and the economy is going to shrink because when they're buying less, more workers get laid off.
These problems caused the NRA to be declared unconstitutional in 1935, but was only the beginning of government involvement in business and finance.
The most successful New Deal programs were those building infrastructure and performing public works, such as the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, and the Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA, which re-employed thousands of workers for economy-growing projects. The New Deal continued in 1935 when Congress passed further relief actions, dubbed the Second 100 Days. Legislature of the Second 100 Days included many of the New Deal's lasting legacies: the Works Progress Administration, WPA, the Social Security Act, and the National Labor Relations Act.
The Works Progress Administration followed the lead of other successful New Deal programs, employing 8.5 million workers to build projects meant to have long-term value. The WPA built or refurbished more than 600,000 miles of roads, more than 120,000 public buildings, and about 80,000 recreational facilities. Iconic WPA projects include San Antonio's Riverwalk and New York's LaGuardia Airport. The WPA was also a great step towards equality in the workplace, paying equally for equal work regardless of the race or gender of the worker.
The Social Security Act created government pensions to provide monetary aid for children, the elderly, the unemployed, and those with disabilities. However, a trend of spending all the Social Security money and not saving for the next generation caused it to remain a hotly debated topic on Capitol Hill.
Finally, the National Labor Relations Act, passed in June 1935, instated workers' rights for the first time.
Essentially, it set out some rules by which workers could get together and choose a collective bargaining agent for them, a union. And then the employer was required by the law to bargain in good faith with that union about things like wages and hours, etc.
Millions of workers joined unions thanks to the American Federation of Labor, AFL, and the Congress of Industrial Organizations, CIO, beginning unionized labor of trades ranging from teaching to air traffic controlling. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 set minimum wage at 25 cents and banned child labor.
After 1935, few reform acts were passed due to shifting concern to Nazi Germany, bringing an end to the New Deal. The United States was finally pulled out of the Great Depression with the beginning of World War II and increased military spending. Though the Depression and New Deal were over, they had left resounding effects on the United States and her people.
Regulatory New Deal legislation, such as the NRA, the National Labor Relations Act, and the Fair Labor Relations Act, were the seeds for greater government involvement in its citizens' personal economies. Unionized labor, minimum wages, and child labor laws all find their beginnings from the New Deal.
The New Deal reformed America in its time of desperation, introducing a larger government, new policies, a new labor force, and new infrastructure. The New Deal was a time of rebirth for the United States, reorganization of the federal government, and preparation for the rest of the 20th century. Roosevelt's New Deal held and reshaped America in a time where reform was needed, and allowed the United States to stay united and grow and become the most powerful nation in the world.